And her mother-in-law, and my mother-in-law said to her, but you know, we were in Cape Breton in 1947 after the war. Your father-in-law was sent there to take down the gun batteries around the coast of Cape Breton. Yeah. And you lived in Sydney Mines. Yeah, well, the only place I wasn't allowed to go was Whitney Pier. I mean, here, this is my in-laws, you know.
What did you say about the Miramichi, though?
Well, the Miramichi's a great place to live, I guess. I married her, I guess. Well, that's the main thing, I guess. But in order for young people to be healthy and effective, how do we help them to be healthy and effective to make that transition to adulthood? How do we help them, young people, so that they can, you know, they can demonstrate to us that they're capable and responsible and caring members of society? How do we do that? Well, we don't do that by closing down their facilities. We don't do that by closing access to their schools. You know, we have a youth secretary in the province of Nova Scotia. A youth secretary. It's the only agency in the provincial government with a mandate devoted exclusively to youth population in Nova Scotia. It's devoted for that. So, I mean, they're supposed to come back to this government and say, look, here's what's going on. They're supposed to come back to this host and tell us to coordinate provincial government needs and concerns and aspirations of Nova Scotian youths, you know, to the population of Nova Scotia, and tell us what we're doing, how we're serving our young people, youth issues and youth concerns. That's why we have this Bill 147 and the driving. Their concerns, you know. I'll go to social interventions, I guess, and programs that help young people, you know, people with special needs. We talked to the Minister of Education was just up recently. I'll give you an example of a school, and I won't mention the name of the school. Sure. This in one school in the province of Nova Scotia has 100 kids waiting for resource. It has 45 young people waiting for an assessment. It has 55 young people waiting to see a speech pathologist. This is one school. This is not a district. I'm just talking about one school. So what is wrong with society today, kids with special needs? Why, you know, this is another part of it. So young people with special needs, you know what I mean? If they go undressed in school and they're not addressed, you know, consequences and later on in life leads to criminal activity. One in 10 Canadians have a learning disability, Mr. Speaker. 3 million people, but only 3% of school-age children with learning disabilities receive special services within their schools. That's a fact. That's a shame. That's what's going on, Mr. Speaker. Research shows that 30% of 70% of young offenders and inmates have experienced learning problems. Imagine, that's quite a rate. I'll repeat that again. Research shows that 30 to 70% of young offenders have learning disabilities. That's Mr. Speaker, and a negative effect, and that all affects adulthood. It all affects their decisions, Mr. Speaker. Well, it's either pay me now. I think that it was once quoted that it would be $100,000 a year to keep a young person incarcerated. But yet we have facilities out there that work on limited budgets that have nothing, that provide these programs to help these young people make decisions, and yet we're willing to spend $100,000 in this, you know, and look at this bill and say we're going to make things stiffer and harder for young people. You know, and my colleague from down in Eastern Passage and had a meeting last Friday, he said, with a community group. That's what you do. You go into your community and you have a meeting with all the different organizations. And I think the meeting was in Shearwater, and the meeting was about what can they do to alleviate the problems in Eastern Passage and Cole Harbour? What can they do? What kind of services can they provide so they can get the young people off the streets? What can they do? And that's being proactive. And I congratulate my member from Eastern Passage for doing those things, eh? You know. But, you know, Mr. Speaker, we look at other causes. We think about my member from Dartmouth East there who put a bill in on alcohol for fetal alcohol syndrome, which put youth at an increased risk of coming into conflict with the law. It's one of the leading causes, learning and behavioral problems, fetal alcohol syndrome. And we saw the bill from the member, Mr. Speaker. We have to help support them in making the right decisions during pregnancy. We have to help support those. Special needs children, you know, Mr. Speaker, they grow up, you know, and they're not, they're just not, their needs aren't being met in the school system. And we look at this bill again and we think of the 4 different agencies, and we always hear ourselves as legislatures or anybody else that there's 4 different agencies in the province of Nova Scotia: Justice, community services, health, and education. And we always hear about young people falling through the cracks because health doesn't know what justice is doing, community services doesn't know what education is doing. We always know that. And what about the age of young people between the ages of 16 and 18? Yeah. These young people are the ones that are drastically falling through the crack because they don't fall under the mandate of income assistance because, you know, they're living here, they're living there, and you have to prove that this is the last resort. It'll take you, I'd say, anywhere of 3 months to figure out to prove to that. That's the only government agency where you're guilty before you even go to court, Mr. Speaker. That's the operations in that community services. They can actually take a person's check away from them. Imagine the hardship of a single mother with 3 children losing her check because somebody else made an accusation. So instead of going out and find out because they had a statement from somebody, they're going to take that check away from that woman. So that woman's waiting for a check at the end of the month with 3 kids, and the check doesn't come. So you call the caseworker and you say, "Hi, I'm the MLA. I'm looking for the information on why that check was removed." "Well, we had a statement from so-and-so." "Well, that was the ex-boyfriend." "Well, that's his girlfriend." But yet they took that check away. So what about those 3 young people that are in that family for that week that just can't do anything and can't eat? I mean, where else do we see such a system where you're guilty? You're guilty before you have a chance to prove yourself. Now, I don't know if there's anywhere other in this country where that happens. And who is devastated by this, Mr. Speaker?
Minister of Community Service on a point of order.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The point of order is I want to assure the member opposite that if one of his constituents encounters that problem, if they were just to put in an appeal, that the practice of the department is to give them the benefit of the doubt and to keep them on community services until they hear the appeal. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Point of order, but clarification of facts, I guess you would say. The honourable member for Cape Breton. The honourable member Cape Breton Nova.
I thank you. That was a great point of order, Mr. Speaker. I'm not even going to bother and acknowledge him that that member even stood up in this house. It's sickening. Don't even sit down. Tell him to get a paper and pen, Mr. Speaker. I've written many letters to him, Mr. Speaker. I know what he's all about.
Well, don't tell us.
Initiatives are offered. What about post-secondary education? You know, post-secondary education. Didn't we see a bill put in today?
We did.
Didn't somebody in this legislature put a bill in here today? You know, the bill said, look, you know, post-secondary education. You know what I mean? How do we get initiatives offered to high school dropouts to encourage them to return to school and graduate and stay away from crime? How do we do that when you're a single parent and you can't go to school? Educationally, Mr. Speaker, these people that live in these neighborhoods and low-income families, their self-esteem is so low, emotionally disturbed at times, as well as in the job market. You know what I mean? The job market. Youth with a grade 12 education or higher are likely not to go to jail. Isn't that a stat? That if you have grade 12, you're most likely that you're not going to jail, Mr. Speaker. According to Corrections Services Canada, grade 7 is the average age of people that are incarcerated today, those people that are in there. Why, Mr. Speaker? Why? We ask ourselves as legislature, you know, we ask ourselves that. Underlying reasons why some youth find it difficult to stay in school, Mr. Speaker. Ask yourself that as a legislature. Why? You know what I mean? Why? Emotional problems, learning disabilities, bullying at school. You know, they can't find the funding to go to school, Mr. Speaker. They can't find the money to go to school, so they get frustrated because they can't get the money to go to school, and they go back to that lifestyle. That lifestyle of the only thing they know is how to survive. How to survive. No matter what they got to do to survive, they're going to do it, Mr. Speaker. That's what we see in young people today, Mr. Speaker. You know what I mean? The government. You know, recreation. I just wish here's a stat that's really, really good. Youth who participate in recreational activities are more likely to do well in school and to have high self-esteem and good social skills. And I'm living proof of that as I stand in this legislature today. If I didn't play all those sports growing up that I mentioned earlier, you know, these personal qualities, you know, that these young people have, they don't get involved in criminal activity, Mr. Speaker. They're too busy. There's an old saying, busy hands are happy hands. If these young people are playing basketball or playing baseball or doing or hockey, but again, you know, when I first got into the field of working with young people, I thought to myself that, all these kids could play sports because of my background. But some of these kids are so mostly disturbed that they couldn't throw a ball up with one hand and catch it with the other hand. So what are we doing in society to provide programming, non-competitive and competitive, and structured and not structured? My colleague from Sackville Cobequid had said earlier, the arts programs. They're usually the first programs that are cut. And all the budgets, they're the first programs that are gone. Always. These are the people that suffer. They're always gone, eh? There are numerous examples I can give you here and here today in the legislature that have, Ottawa, I said earlier about building a youth center, the crime went down by 60%. The Dufferin Mall, I'm just thinking up in Bay St. Lawrence and the center they turned the old school into it. Community cares in North Sydney. I just think about all of those things, eh? What about the P3 schools? The P3 schools. In our community, the only schools that are open are the schools that are owned by the community. Like in the new schools built we can't get access to them. Whether it's insurance, whether we just don't have access because the school board doesn't own the schools. So how can I rent a gym for the kids to play floor hockey on Saturday if the school is not available? Again, so you may have, I remember when I ran the mini basketball program back in 1980 and 81 on Saturday mornings for kids ages 9 to 12. I remember going there every Saturday morning. The school was open. Now for you to get a school, you have to pay somebody to come up to shut off the alarm, get the alarm off. Well, that's fine. Even to raise that amount of $20 a day for 4 weekends a month or whatever, that becomes a cost. But again, we see all these costs that have been downloaded that were services that were once provided through the government, and over the years it's been gutted. The whole social network, when we talk about young people, has been gutted. Everything from recreation, from school, from children that live in poverty, integrating recreation into schools and job readiness programs. There's an example, Mr. Speaker. I used to run youth internship programs. I would take 12 young people off the streets or out of the neighborhood between the ages of 18 and 29. What I would do is help these young people find their first employment, but in the meantime, I would make sure that they had their WMIS, their CPR, their first aid, their St. John ambulance before they went on a job. And some of those young people that I first took in, they didn't have a bank account. I had to take them to the bank to cash their check because they didn't have a bank account. I had to help them open a bank account. They didn't have a bank account. They never knew. So a lot of these I took 53 young people in over 6 years out of the community and put them on youth internship programs. But again, these are small fixes. These are not core fundings. So all these nonprofit organizations, as you see, they live from grant to grant. Whether it's the Family Place Resource Center, whether it's early childhood intervention. When they talk about early childhood intervention and we see the daycare program coming out federally and we see what's going on there. So there's people that work in the early childhood intervention that can sit down and look at these young people and say, yeah. They'll know the ones that are going to be incarcerated. They'll know the ones that are going to cause problems in society because they know their needs aren't being met. Their needs aren't being met. They're just not being met. Their needs are not being met. The Young Offenders Act in 1985, I think it was the first Young Offenders Act when they changed that to the restorative justice program. But before that, we had alternative measures. And I used to sit down as a community person on alternative measures to help determine what it should be. So when I look at the Bill 147, I say to myself again, how do we, as legislators and society, get government to put enough money into these programs? How do I sit and stand in this legislature today and ask, how do we do these things? We can all sit down and have hundreds of reports, thousands of pieces of papers. It's like we spend all this money on studies. We have a great study for this, we have a great study for that. But how many of those studies that we do, whether it's health, education, justice, whatever, are actually implemented? We spend good money, we receive good reports from people, we look at them, we know what's going on, but yet we don't have the money to implement any of these reports and studies that are given to us as legislators. I just think that young people with strong social connections, they're less likely to engage in activities such as drinking and driving. That's a fact. Early in, unprotected sex and drug use. I mean, these are things that, with the social connections, if they're in a good social peers and good group, those are things that they stay away from. That's a fact. So if you can provide those kind of programs, you know what I mean? The youth that feel involved, they feel safe, they feel connected. And I've seen this over the years of being there. They feel that they're connected to something. They have a safe place to gather. They have good relationship with peers, skills, constructive activities for their spare time. They're not running down the road doing vandalism and busting windows in school. They're participating in good constructive, Excuse me, Mr. Speaker.
That's the stuff. Just take a drink of that water.
Unfortunately, young people have little opportunity for meaningful involvement during this key transition period. What I mean the transition period is, adolescence is a turbulent time in life in general before we become adulthood. And we all know what that's like, Mr. Speaker. There's 52 or 51 of us now that sit in this legislature and know what it's like to go through adolescence and know what it's like to have people that cared for us. And every piece of literature that I used to send out as a youth worker, I used to always put on the bottom. And I always put on the bottom of that, youth don't care what you know until they know that you care.
Good point. Good point.
And that's the truth. And we as legislatures or we as society,
Care what you know.
they just, they don't care what you know. As long as they know that you care, as long as somebody's going to be there for them. As long as you're going to be there to listen to them. You're not going to judge them. You're just going to be there to listen to them, Well, youth participation in good programs, give them a chance to develop decision-making, good decision-making, problem-solving skills. They develop meaningful relationships with the opposite sex, and a chance, Mr. Speaker, to bolster self-esteem, self-worth. These are benefits known to protect young people from risk-taking behavior. This is a fact. That they know that if these programs and these services are provided, that these young people are less likely to get involved in risk-taking behavior. Like this, like picking up a set of keys and causing the death of somebody. And when I think of that case, and I think about when I first saw it on the news and I saw the mother, and how many times did I go and look for help? Help from who? Help in school? Was she a single-parent mother? She helped from the income assistance? You know what I mean? We think about all those things, Creating opportunities for young people. Creating opportunities for youth in care. As a member of the Standing Committee on Community Services, one of the first people that came into that committee, the young people, were doing a newsletter called Voices. And they're youth in care. These are young people, youth in care. And I remember when I first, at the youth center, I decided myself that, there is some kids that come to this facility that are in care. They're under the minister's care, but I guess under the children's aid, which is not under the minister's care, so I'm not going to get involved in that one. But what I'm doing is trying to say is that I took youth in care and found them summer jobs, their first jobs again, Mr. Speaker. Took them out of foster care and said, look, gave them summer jobs. In other words, I was telling them that I respected them, that they could work at my facility, that they could be involved with the young people there. They became so involved in the facility, it was almost like he was wanting my job. This is a youth in care, that he was being so involved that he was bringing the music in. He was playing the music at the dances. He was, just for that 8-week work term that he worked there in the summer on his first paycheck. You know what I mean? And then I think about another group that came to the Standing Committee on Community Services was foster care in crisis. And I know some in the government didn't feel good about that title. I do remember, I think there was a letter that was sent to the Standing Committee on Community Services about the behavior towards the Deputy Minister. I didn't come to this legislature to call anybody down or to do anything like that. I came here as an elected official to know that there's problems in society today that I can be a part of solving. And this is one of them. This is one of them here. This is one of them. We have to learn that, what can we do? What can we do? Again, we talk about getting them involved. We see another study comes out, obesity in Nova Scotia. Obesity, you know what I mean? Only 15% of Nova Scotia high school students take physical education. Only 15%. Only 25% of Nova Scotia children ages between 5 years of age and 17 years of age walk or bike to school. Walk or bike to school. I hear the members saying this is on the bill. Well, what I'm trying to do is bring some kind of, this bill is Bill 147. What I'm trying to do is, how did this bill come about? What made the decision for that young lad to pick up those keys and cause that? And what, Tell them, what are the principles of this bill? How do we stop somebody from doing that? How do we stop somebody from making that decision? I'm trying to explain myself here this evening as a youth worker and somebody that worked in the field, that how not to make that decision, Mr. Speaker. That's all I'm trying to say. I don't have all the answers, but I do have some answers. I spent 15 years in there, and I know what it's like. I worked locking them up at night. I worked in open custody. I worked in closed custody. I know what it's like, and I do know what it's like. Living in, we'll go back, maybe I'll get another rise at the minister again, I guess. I'm going to touch on housing. I'm going to touch on some stuff in housing that hopefully is not a point of order this time, Mr. Speaker. I think I'll have a sip before that happens. Okay. Living in poor quality housing is a well-established factor for behavior and educational problems, Mr. Speaker, clearly linked to higher neighborhood criminal action. You know, why we have a program, I think it was announced, the feds announced it about 2 years ago, the Affordable Housing Program. I sat in his legislature last year and I asked a question to that minister about affordable housing in Cape Breton. The minister stood up in his place and said, Cape Breton will get its fair share. It's 2 years and we got our fair share, zero. Nothing. Our fair share. We do. Mr. Speaker, living in poor quality housing is well-established risk factor for behavior and educational programs. That's a fact. Because they live in poor housing. They don't have good housing to live in. You know, conditions adversely affect the physical and mentally. I remember being talking about growing up in the community, and there was a bunch of low-income housing that was up on the hill across from the rink. And that nickname stuck on that housing group for years. It was called a chicken coop. So anybody came from that neighborhood, they were come from the chicken coops. That was the state. So it didn't matter. You were poor, you came from the chicken coops. That was housing provided by the government. People were judging them just because of word. People judged everybody in Whitney Pier just because they were from the word pier. That's why. It didn't matter. But I mean, you came from that part. It was all divided neighborhoods. Whether you're from the Covens, whether you're from the chicken coops, whether you're from Hunky Town, or whether you're from Dog Patch, or whether you're from Rabbit Town, it didn't matter. You're still from Whitney Pier. When I first went to the Sydney Academy, we had a door at high school. It was the pier door. We're associated from all the different students because that was the pier door. The pier, because those kids from the pier were no good. They just weren't any good. It's as simple as that. They went in that door and they controlled that door for many years. That's what they thought. That's what everybody thought. But I look back at my grade 8 picture and I think of the guy that's sitting down on the waterfront here who's a Supreme Court justice. Imagine, he came from the pier. I see the 3 doctors one at the IWK and 2 in the Queen Elizabeth Health Science Center. 3 brothers, they all came from the Lingan Road and the pier. I think of the 3 boys in the RCMP, 2 families, not 1, 2. They have 3 sons in the RCMP. And these are all from the, how could these people from the pier make it? You know, what's going on? How could they make it? Why did they make it? They made it because they had people that were in their community that cared. They had people in there that volunteered. They had people in there that cared. They had people in there that would say to you, why would I want to steal that car? Gordy, that's not a good decision.
Role models that can't be Crawford.
Well, yes, excellent role models. Excellent role models. Campy Crawford, the first black police officer in the province of Nova Scotia, east of Montreal. You know, in impact, it was absolutely one of the finest person, and I had the honor to play ball with him back in 1970, we'll say, or a little bit earlier, I guess, back in 1979, actually. We went away to the Eastern Canadians in Moncton. Actually,
how'd you do?
We finished second in the Eastern Canadian that year, but Campy Crawford. You think of the other resolution that I read today, Calvin Ruck.
Yes, Calvin Ruck.
Calvin Ruck, the senator. You think of Winston Ruck, 1064. You think of Isaac Phils, the Order of Canada in 1967. These are people that came from that community that were no good. These are people that made an impact in this country. These are people that made a difference in this country. But again, like I said, they came from housing. The perception, you know, I'll give you an example, Mr. Speaker. Families who pay more than 30% on their pre-tax income dwellings are considered to be in core housing need. The number of such families rose by 91% from 1989 to 1996. That's astonishing. Realize that. It's even higher now. It's even higher now. And then I'll go back to another subject about housing and that. When you're an income income assistant recipient and your child tax credit, your national child tax credit. I mean, that money is earmarked. That money is strictly earmarked for what it says, child tax credit. So that money is given to families for clothing, given to families for buying new clothes for kids to go to school, or buying little things for the children. Low-income families, you know what they spend that money on? They spend that money on providing food, shelter, other things. That money is not going to put new clothes on children. It's not going to help because they have to spend it because of the budget and the low income that they receive. That money earmarked for the children is spent on household needs. And that's a fact. That's a fact. I just think of, you know, I'm looking and saying the problem of affordable housing can be, how do we address things? I think about when I thought about affordable housing, and I heard on the news that there was a housing development that was going to go in the Minister of Service Nova Scotia's riding.
Hammond's Plain Sackville.
That's possible, Hammond, Plain, Sackville, whatever. And the community didn't want that. And I'm saying to myself, they don't want it. Geez, I'll take that in Cape Breton. Please, you know, please bring that down to Cape. Please, affordable housing, 2 years. The minister said you're going to get your fair share, Cape Breton. 0. We get our fair share again. You know, but yet these people in this area, don't want that housing. And I'm saying to myself, we're dying for affordable housing in Cape Breton, and in this area of the province, they don't want it. So I'll ask somebody in the legislature today, maybe they can persuade the same people to build those in my riding, because I'd surely appreciate it. I surely appreciate it, Mr. Speaker. It would help my riding and take all these low-income families and give them good homes to live in, where somebody's not ripping the siding off at night, or somebody's not breaking in and stealing the radiators. I mean, you know, the lackable affordable housing is a key factor, Mr. Speaker, in why crimes are committed. For years, my colleague from Dartmouth North would always say that if we're putting too many of these low-income families in affordable housing neighborhoods, that we have to spread them out. But yet we see this area of the province that do not want them in their area. And here we are trying to spread them out. And we talk about income. We'll talk about income. We'll talk about income. Do you think that young fella, his parents were making over $30,000 a year, or that young fella, I'll give you a little example. If that young fella, improvements in family income, you know, improvements in family income, a child at the risk of family income, when a family's income reaches $30,000, this kind of risk-taking behavior is not there. When they reach that $30,000 plateau mark, that risk of that is not there. The risk of that is not there. When a family income reaches $40,000, it changes. So you think as a youth worker and somebody else that's working there knowing that poor children are 4.1 times more likely to engage in aggressive behavior than children in middle or income families. Poor children are more likely to exhibit delinquent behaviors compared to those in middle and high income families. That's a stat. But yet we still provide those families. When I get a kick up when I think of that, you're allowed $184 to eat for the month for a person. $144. Then I say, my colleague from Dartmouth North has always been in my right ear since I've been elected, telling me that, you know, the fastest growing industry in Nova Scotia is food banks. And I constantly heard that since the day I was elected from this member. So if I was to tell my young fellow to go to school to get a degree and a PhD in food banks, because that's what I heard since I got here, you know, to tell him to go to school because that's what he's saying. Children who live in persistent poverty are less likely to be included in aspects of society that are critical to their healthy growth and development. Like getting involved in sports, getting involved in team sports. I think there's a bill in the House of Commons as I speak here this evening by our colleague from Sackville, Eastern Shore, that if families get their children involved in sports, there will be a tax credit.
Good member.
That's a good member trying to do that, Mr. And he's got that bill in the House of Commons that if your children are enrolled in sports, that you'll receive a tax credit. I think that's a positive first step. There's all kinds of first steps that we can take as legislators. You know, I just think that, you know, incarceration of low income, most of the young people that are incarcerated back in the 89 to 99, most of those, and the stats will tell you, all came from low income families. All came from low income families. You know, No. But, and then I go back again, I think back to, my memory is really coming back to thinking that in 1990, excuse me, Mr. Speaker. In 1990, this government, the government of Canada, signed a declaration in the UN, the elimination of child poverty.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
By 2000. I think my memory is right to that, by the elimination of child poverty. So right now, as we stand in the legislature here this evening, child poverty is at 15.6%. At that time, it was at 15.2%. So 1 in every 6 child in Canada are now live in poverty. That's what we're legislators. We're supposed to be able to do something to help these young people, to help these families. You know, insurance, imagine an issue like insurance for these groups to go. Insurance, well, because these nonprofit organizations cannot afford to pay $180 for an event to put it on, whether it's cheerleading in the school or whether it's something else, $150, floor hockey, basketball, gym. How do we get over the hump for doing that? How do we learn that, you know, Mr. Speaker, employment. You know, I'm thinking about employment, Mr. Speaker. When I first started the youth internship program, none of these kids were employed. None of them at all. Mr. Speaker, not one. I remember when I thought it helped them open bank accounts. It helped them feel their self-esteem and their self-worth and how good they felt actually having their first bank account. I just think about all those things that can be done, and that I think about the Breakfast for Learning. I remember when I went to the school in my neighborhood in 1994 and said I was looking at a Breakfast for Learning program, and they just opened the door and told me to, you know, we're not going to have that. Who's going to come to the school and do that? You know, who's going to come to that school at 7 o'clock in the morning and do those things that you're thinking about doing? Well, I was told that no Breakfast for Learning programs in those schools, that I could not, you know, I'm willing to volunteer and have some staff go into those schools. Here it is 2005, and we're having Breakfast for Learning programs in every school. You know, what a difference from the time that I went in there 11 years ago to it is now. But that Breakfast for Learning program is still going on at the Whitney Pier Youth Club. You know, breakfast is important because you can't train the brain unless you got the fuel.
That's right.
You can't train the brain unless you got the fuel, you know, Mr. Speaker.
How many kids would it be, Gordy?
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking about 64,000 kids over a 9-year period.
Unreal.
64,000. That's not counting how many dinners. Over 100,000 dinners were served in that facility. A lot of pasta sauce, and they call it Gord Special every Tuesday, and garlic bread.
What'd they call that for?
Oh, because Gord cooks her up on the weekend, even when he goes. Well, when Gord goes home on the weekend, he cooks on the weekends, and he sends the dinner up to the kids on Tuesday to this day. Even though I'm a member of this legislature, I still as myself, I still sit on the board of directors, and I'd never leave that place go. I'd give this job up tomorrow if I thought something were going to happen to the youth in my community. I would give it up tomorrow. No, by no means. This bill, again, back to the Bill 147, the decision about how he picked those keys up and why he did those things. You know, I'm wondering why he did those things. You know what I mean? I just think of them, and I'm saying to myself, if I had been there. I remember when I first got in the field, and I just realized that I don't think I could ever be involved in custody and locking young people up again. You know what I mean? Let's talk about treatment facilities. Like earlier, my colleague from Sackville had said, Sackville Cobequid had said, talking about treatment facilities and mental health issues, that they have a treatment facility in Truro. Is that treatment facility open as we speak in the legislature here today? You know, that's a step in the right direction. No, there's many more different things. Again, I come back to constructive and non-constructive programs and competitive and non-competitive. I talk about having a teen night on a Friday night. I talked about the midnight basketball program. A teen night on Friday nights where they can bring their own music, bring their guitars, and do their own thing. With one condition, that, you know, no drugs or no alcohol. Do your own thing. Empower the young people. Empower the young people to come there and help them. And you know what, Mr. Speaker? Those young people are good young people. Very good young people. But I mean, When a young person goes in a mall today and they have a knapsack, every security guard in the mall walks behind that fella because he's a young person with a knapsack. Young people today are discriminated against just because they're young, because they're dressed in Gothic clothes and all black, or they have their hair to the purple, and they have earrings from one end to the other end. Mr. Speaker, I think of just because they look that way and they dress that way, they're discriminated against. They're prejudiced against those people. Criminal offenses are often committed when the perpetrator is under the influence of drugs or alcohol. So I thought to myself that and other people in the board of directors of the Whitney Pier Youth Club and the people that's still there, say, how do we help those young people not to make those decisions of drugs and alcohol? How do we prevent them? Say, give them opportunities and good choices to make and good decisions. We did that by providing constructive programming. Constructive. And what I mean by constructive is computers and music and art and theater and drama. Those types of things. And garden. A beautiful garden alongside that facility. A beautiful garden. 18 Norwegian maple trees. Japanese sumac, Japanese quince. I'm thinking of the garden. And when I first went to put that garden in, everybody in the community said they're going to destroy that garden. They're going to cut, it's the only garden in the community. But everybody said the kids are going to smash that garden up. 7 years later, that garden is in that community and as beautiful as a day and expanding each and every year. And that's something I learned from when I was in school when I was a young lad. Right. When Mother St. George used to tell us young fellas in Holy Redeemer Boys School, I was in the Catholic school system again, to paint your name on that window.
What was that for?
So we'd always paint their name on the window. Gordy Goss or somebody else had their name painted on the window. Well, those windows were never broke because your name was on those windows. And it was just a little thing like that. So I thought that by plant ownership of the programs, by empowering youth and getting youth. We've always had 2 youth members on the board of directors, a male and a female, so they can bring in their ideas. I always told the young people that they ran the facility. I only worked there. They ran the facility for $45,000 for 11 years. That's 2 people working. I don't know how they done to this day. And I think of all the letters I sent, and I think of all the different things and we become beggars. Non-profit organizations in the province of Nova Scotia have become beggars. When they come to the government all the time looking for money, they don't have core money. They live to help human beings and to help young people. The basic human rights are neglected. When they have to come in here and ask us to have money for insurance so the kids can play floor hockey or basketball, or they can have core funding. All these non-profit organizations live from grant to grant. The Community Mobilization Program, great program run by the federal government. You can apply for that. I ran different programs through the Community Mobilization Program. We ran on programs where we had young people going into senior citizens and doing card games and doing bingos. So we had young people going into senior citizens, you know what I mean? And that's living from grant to grant. So you apply for another grant. You apply to the corporations. You apply to them each and every year, you know what I mean? Each and every year we keep applying. So again, it brings me back to the Bill 147. I mean, all those things that are neglected, in society today that we don't have because we're not providing those programs for young people. We're not providing the counseling for those young people. And I still think of this lady saying that I've asked people for help. There was nobody there to help me. You know what I mean? I'll give it, in Canada, where Young Criminal Justice Act specifies that non-violent offenders must be sent to appropriate treatment. This is a serious shortfall in this province. How can we send them to appropriate treatment? We don't have the appropriate treatment facilities to deal with all these problems. Mr. Speaker, I take my hats off to all the non-profit organizations, all the Boys and Girls Clubs, Police Boys and Girls Clubs, Heartwood down the valley, I take it at Whitney Pier Youth Club, and all these people that are out there that work so hard to do the things that this government used to do. They work so hard. You know what I mean? If we provided the core funding and the money available to these organizations and the proven organizations in this province, we wouldn't be here with this bill here in this legislature today. If they stopped. What would happen if everybody stops volunteering and people are not going to these organizations? You see what's happening today. You see what's going on. You see what's going on with the swarmings here in the metro area. You see what's going on with the vandalism in Cape Breton North. You see what's going on with Dartmouth North. You see those things that are going on. When you have members of the government doing petitions, 3,000 names on the petitions for vandalism in this area, and people in North Sydney asking you to come over there and speak to them. What did you do in your community to solve that problem? You know, what did we do? We provided constructive programming for young people. Not video games, not pool tables, constructive programming. But yet, again, the gaming money. We'll go back to the gaming money. We'll go back to that. So all these organizations that used to apply for that money now are going to be twisted around to apply for the District Health Authority. I'm just hoping that that money is still going to be available to provide programs. But again, the people that work in those organizations, they become funding and marketing personnel. They become people that have to go out there and raise money. Imagine the time that could be spent working with young people if you weren't out there raising money. Imagine if you weren't out there providing programs for young people. And again, that little bit of money that we spend on prevention. So if you look at it, I said earlier and as I spoke, $100,000 to incarcerate a young person for a year.
Shameful.
You could have two youth centers open in different areas of the province. I met with people. I just spoke to a grade 12 class down in Bridgewater.
Did you?
No, Liverpool. Liverpool.
South Shore.
Down the South Shore. And they said the same thing to me. They jump in the car on the weekend. They get in their car and they do the same thing they do with every small town in Nova Scotia. They park in the empty parking lots with their friends.
Go to the end of the government
They go to the end of the government wharf or they go down in the main streets. And Mr. Speaker, I thank you very much for giving me the time to speak on this tonight. Hopefully I've made my points clear about spending money with young people is the most important thing that we should be doing as legislators. Thank you very much.
Recognized Honourable Member Timberley Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Firstly, I think it's of real consequence to recognize that when you have a member who stands in this House and can speak with some authority and some experience, and more importantly, some sincerity that we just heard over the last hour, you have to be recognized. I want to congratulate the member. I want to congratulate the member from Cape Breton Nova because long before he came to this House, long before I had the opportunity to actually meet and talk to Gordy Goss, I remember the first time I saw him hit a pitch out in Summerside one day when he's playing ball in Charlottetown. And I said, so that's Gordy Goss, the youth worker from the pier. That's the reputation that got you in this House, and that speech is an example of what's going to keep you in this House. Now, Mr. Speaker, I know that you particularly, and myself specifically, am aware of the fact that many years ago, you would have been looking at a youth at risk. There is no doubt that growing up in the community that I grew up in, that Bill 147 would not have in any way provided any guidance or direction to the son of a penitentiary guard who was growing up in Dorchester, New Brunswick. And at the time, I want members to know that my father had a very simple message to me as his know-it-all son. And I would imagine many of you could look at this and say, well, you haven't changed much. But let me tell you that my father had a very simple message. He used to say to me, you make your choice. What side of the bars do you want to end up on? Because if you keep going in the direction you're going in, you're going to jail. And let me tell you, there was also that measuring tone that would be given by my mother who said, he's not going to jail, he's going to become a school teacher. Now, what the comparison between the two jobs is, I will give you those comments as I speak during the next few moments. But let me tell you, and I think it's of real consequence to remember, that in the town that I grew up in, my father wasn't just a penitentiary guard, he was also the man who had the keys to the school. He had the keys to the school. This is the same man who never graduated from high school, who left and went overseas with a grade 8 education and worked in the foundry system at home in New Brunswick, but that man was trusted with the keys to the school. And we always took it for granted that when there was nothing else to do on a rainy day in the summer, or school March break, or over the winter Christmas break, or even when school was canceled some days, well, we could just go over to Mr. Esterbrook's house, and he would open up the school and let us in. Now, let me tell you, those truly were the good old days. The good old days as it should be, when young people were given direction, when young people were given role models, and there weren't obstacles and barriers put in the way of keeping them busy and keeping them out of trouble. Now, along the way, Mr. Speaker, I want you to know that I was positively influenced by many people in my life. But along the way, the most important influence came from an athletic coach who used to take the same message time and time and time again. Keep them busy and keep them out of trouble. And I heard the member from Cape Breton Nova speak earlier about the Midnight Basketball League. I mean, think about this. If you've never been to the pier and you want to see how youth get involved and have ownership of a particular program, you should come and see how this particular youth group operates and works. No one pays. It's free. It's open. It's not based upon daddy's checkbook and whether he can afford the best skates in town or whether you're going to have the latest basketball uniform. It's free, and it's open, and it's available to all. Yet, Mr. Speaker, I hear the Minister of Health Promotions loudly proclaim the fact, and I'll table this in a moment. It comes from the last edition of the Masthead News, in which there's an announcement in here that Health Promotion has announced a $4,900 grant to the Active Family and Young Teen program for the East St. Margaret School. That's a wonderful piece of news, $4,900. But right off the top, for members opposite, there's $1,000 charged for the rental of the school, and there's a need for $500 in insurance, so that a grant that went out to help young people in the community that I represent of $4,900 has suddenly got $1,500 right off the top taken away from the grant. Now, that would seem to me, Mr. Speaker, if we are going to offer worthwhile programs to these kids, why are we not saying that this is not a grant for $4,900? Instead, if my math hasn't failed me through this, it's a grant for $3,400. That's still money, and we still thank the Minister of Health Promotion for it, but the obstacles are in the way. The obstacles are there because of the young people who need the opportunity to be involved in their community. You know, Mr. Speaker, I know in your previous career that you worked with many young people at risk, many young people with time on their hands, many young people who perhaps are a bit stigmatized by the fact that they're teenagers. And as teenagers, they are troublemakers. Well, that's just unfair. Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to say that I can tell you the names of many, many young people who are not troublemakers, who are positive role models, who have been involved in the community that I live in and have taught school in for many years. And these young people are involved in their community, and now as coaches themselves or advisors to clubs or involved in various activities in our community, they themselves are giving back to the community that they are a part of. I want to reiterate the words that were brought forward by the member from Cape Breton Nova, and I hope the members opposite heard these words. Youth don't care what you know, they want to know you care. Think about those words. You're not going to impress teenagers these days with all the knowledge which you have as an adult. They really don't care what you know. They want to know that you care, that you have the time for them, that you will listen to them as an adult, that you, whether you're a policeman or a deputy sheriff or a school teacher, you have the time to listen to them, to allow them to have their say. Now, Mr. Speaker, I want to point out to you a few examples of things that are very positive in the community that I represent. And I also want to make clear to the Minister of Justice that I believe in consequences. I believe in consequences. And if you make it very clear to young people, these are the consequences, and this is what we expect of you, and those expectations are clearly stated, and the consequences are followed through on it, the huge majority of young people, they will meet those expectations. But if you aim low and you treat them inappropriately, they will respond. You know, the experience has always been, if you treat them like animals, they will be animals. And I mean that in a very derogatory way, but if you treat them with a lack of respect, they will give you no respect in return. Many, many young people are very quick in terms of they know the people, the adults, who care for them. They know and they are aware of the fact what they can get in terms of respect from adults, from decision makers in our communities. And what does Bill 147 do about that? Really quite nothing. It doesn't address that issue. Instead, we're saying we should be proactive. Well, aren't we being quite reactive when we look at it? I mean, we are aware of the consequences of the terrible situation involving Miss McAvoy and on her unfortunate passing. We are aware of the poor decisions that were made by that young man on that eventful day. And there is no doubt that he is going to live with the consequences of his decision for many years to come. But let's look at the situation here. You know, we have these kids, whether they're in our classrooms or they're in our courts or whether they're in our judge-appointed decision-making and they're going on to some form of incarceration. But we have to balance all these things, Mr. Speaker. And what are they learning? Just tell me, what are they learning? You know, the comment has been made, it takes a village to raise a child. It takes a town. It takes a city. It takes a group of people who have an investment in young people who are going to make their particular influence on a young person. And when it comes to having a young person who does get in trouble, unfortunately, they will say various reasons for it happened. They will blame the home. They will point out single parent status. They will point out the fact that perhaps he or she has not done well in school. They will point to other examples. And those people who are being accusative of that young person should look a little bit deeper for causes. They should look a little bit deeper when they realize that the reasons for some children turning into adolescence with trouble is that they have not been given the opportunity. Now, I know there are people who will say there are some kids who are just bad. Well, Mr. Speaker, that is not true. That is not true. Children are all blessed. When they arrive in this world, they are wonderfully innocent little people. And in return, as adults and as examples, we have to make sure that we are there to guide them and assist them. Because let me tell you, and I know the member from Cape Breton Centre has heard this story many times before. There was the time that there was a hockey player from New Brunswick who won the high school hockey championship. And he came home late this night, far too late, in fact. And when he crept into the back door and he left his hockey gear out in the snowbank, and the result, of course, was, as he walked, and I must tell you, Mr. Speaker, came in through the living room and crawled in front of the television, that particular young man realized, uh-oh, that's my father sitting there watching me from the lazy boy, and he's concerned about why we won a high school hockey championship, and his son never called him, his son never informed him, his son never came home, but instead he arrives home in the late of the night in a condition that he should not be proud of. And the member from Cape Breton Centre always shares this moment because at that time, when that particular father took the hockey player outside and locked him in the woodshed in Dorchester, New Brunswick, and said to him, "That's where you're spending the night tonight. You'll feel a lot better in the morning." Now let me tell you, those were consequences. And at no time since that day had I ever put my parents in a position where they would be embarrassed by such behavior. Now, Mr. Speaker, I must candidly admit to you, in admission of things that have happened before, I was that young man in front of the television set. And let me tell you, when you're in a situation when you understand the consequences of your behavior, and when you look at how young people are going to be influenced, let's look at the fact punishment and the crime, although in this time, where's the balance? Many, many young people make mistakes. They make the mistakes and they learn from the mistakes. But along the way as adults, Mr. Speaker, we have not been of great assistance. As a legislator now, we stand here and we pontificate at times about what we do for our community. But in return, we must look at what we haven't done for our community. And I can point to the schools in my community, Mr. Speaker. And let me tell you, I have had this discussion with you many times in this chair, and I bring it to the members' attention. I've brought it to school board members' attention. I cannot rationalize why, if taxpayers pay for the schools in this province, why they're closed all the time. Why on the weekends they are not open for activities. And I'm not just saying the gymnasium, Mr. Speaker. I'm not just saying that we have to have the athletes involved. I'm talking about the fact that if we are going to have young people in the straight and narrow, if we are going to have young people who understand the consequences of their actions, we have to provide alternatives for them to make sure that they are going to have a positive upbringing. And I can use the best example of all, and that is school March break. I have discussed this matter with members of my caucus. I've discussed it with education ministers. The toughest day in the school system is the Monday after March break. The Monday after March break. Because there you are when they come back into school, and kids, of course, the peer pressure involved. So where did you go on March break? And how come you don't have a tan like I do? Because my parents, my father, my mother could afford to take me skiing at Sugarloaf, to the south for some sun, spring training in Florida. And what happens? What happens, Mr. Speaker, to that student who says, "I didn't do anything. I stayed home and played video games or hung out around the corner store"? Can't even get into our schools over March break. An opportunity for them to have some positive physical activity, an opportunity to be able to get into the school, to get onto the computers, to, heaven forbid, use the library. In the community that I represent, the libraries are in the school. There is one public library, and it is one busy place. But in some of the more remote areas of my community, more rural areas of my community, the library is in the school. Now, it would seem to me what a wonderful opportunity to have young people being able to have access to the school. Access to the school at all times. Not worrying about rent. Saying in return, this is a trustworthy adult in the community. That trustworthy adult should be given the keys to the school. So that if he or she is willing of her or his time to give openly and willingly to go in and supervise an activity, to sign out a book in the library, to be involved in the computer program, or just to be available as an adult, as an example, those would be the sorts of things that would be proactive. Those would be the sorts of things that are not addressed in Bill 147. Those are the sorts of things that would increase the fact that young people have ownership of their community and they feel comfortable in their community. You know, the word is respect, Mr. Speaker. I used to tell the teams of the kids that I coached in school, you know, although many of them were not of the awareness of what Aretha Franklin used to sing for us, and I won't do for you here, but that word respect, you get it because of what you do with and for young people. The member from Cape Breton Nova has and continues to have the respect of the young people in his community. He gives them the time, he gives them the effort, and in return, they meet his expectations. He treats them with respect, and in return, they treat him with respect. Now, Mr. Speaker, in a previous career in the job that you had, I know you were put in some tough situations, some situations where there would be difficulties, but let me tell you, there would be many other times. Now, Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to accept the rabbit tracks of the member from Cape Breton Centre or any other references to keys being locked in cars or any particular fines. What I'm talking about, the fact here is, kids today get a bad rap. Kids today get a bad rap. You know, it's suddenly front page news that this particular event happened, this swarming happened, this violent event happened. And without doubt, we can't say they're not happening. But more importantly, I think it's important for the Minister of Justice and members of that cabinet and us as MLAs in our communities to say, why are they happening? And we've heard from the member from Dartmouth North in the past, the member from Halifax Needham. I've been in these debates in this House, and I've heard the member from Halifax Needham during estimates asked for suspension statistics from schools. And she would like to know the suspension statistics from schools and why they are suspended, these young people, for what length of time are they suspended, and particularly some of the specific reasons of what schools have what suspension rates. They shouldn't be secret. They should be in the open. If that is an indicator, if that's an indicator of the problems that we have in the school system, then let's deal with it. Let's get out there and let's deal with it. Now, I heard the member earlier commenting upon the waiting list for school psychologists. And I'm aware of the fact that he didn't use the school's name. And I understand some of the reasons for that. But I hear from teachers in the schools in my community, and they know that there's at-risk kids in their schools. They know there's children that they have under their care that are coming to school each day with no breakfast, that they're coming to school each day and both of their parents are addicted to VLTs. They are aware of the fact that they don't have 2 cents to rub together, that they can't buy what they expect in the cafeteria, that they go to the guidance counselor, and that they are covered by the Lions Club as they go through that lunch that day. Those young kids who are in that situation, they feel bad about that, Mr. Speaker. But in return, we have to offer them positive examples. We have to offer them help. We have to be able to say that we are there for them. When they are at risk, and it doesn't take an Einstein as a teacher to realize that that young fellow right there, if we can't reach out and help him now, if we as a community, as a policeman, as a social worker, as a guidance counselor, as a phys ed teacher, if we can't reach out and help that young person right now, heaven forbid when he or she is in grade 8 or grade 11 or 12, because that's when they're going to make decisions that will really affect them and will affect the community. So let me tell you, Mr. Speaker, when I hear from history teachers and geography teachers that I heard from earlier today when we were talking about a particular problem in a school, I mean, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. You either help them now or pay for it later. And that's the problem we're having at this time. We have a situation here where we have an obviously high-profile court case, that had real consequences in the community in which some of us live. And everyone is aware of this. Yet when we look back at the history of these children as they become adults, it would be no surprise to the teachers of those children. It would be no surprise to the youth workers. It would be no surprise perhaps to the minister or the priest that that young child, when he was of whatever age or she was of whatever age, needed a guiding hand, needed some help, needed some advice, needed an adult who would allow them the time to be able to listen to them. Now, Mr. Speaker, I also had the opportunity today to mention or to meet this outstanding young lady who goes to St. Yves's, Miss Clyke. She was in our gallery here today, as she took the trip from Antigonish. And of course, she is one of those people that I was so proud to say that your education's the key. You know, they can take your car from you. They can repossess your house. They can take the material goods away from you, but they can never take your education from you. That diploma, whether it's from whatever vocational school, or whether it's from the Nova Scotia Community College, or whether it is a PhD from Harvard, they cannot take it from you. That's the key. And I hear the member or the Minister of Community Services on occasion wax poetic about what this government has done, what this government is doing for some young people like Miss Clyke. Well, let me tell you, the door is closing on Miss Clyke. She wants a degree. She wants the independence. She wants the opportunity to have to and to make sure that she can take care of her own children and provide an example for them. That's what she said to me today. What she's doing as a single mother, she wants that education because she can say, and she wants that degree. She wants that degree because she can say to her own kids, I got this, I did this, and you can do it also. Now let me tell you, when that piece of legislation is brought to this House, I hope the member from the Minister of Community Services is open-minded and looks realistically at what is good and what is best when it comes to these young people, whether it's Miss Clyke or other examples that I can bring to your attention. And I also heard my young friend from Sackville-Cobequid talk about young people in the mental health system. The young people in the mental health system. And I've brought to the Minister of Community Services this case before, and it's a case of real consequence. It's a case involving a young blind man who was a grade 11 student at C.P. Allen High School. He was in a group home, Mr. Speaker, if you remember the details. And this young man, because of an incident in the group home, has been placed on 4 South at the IWK, which is the mental health ward. He has not been assessed. He has not been taken care of. He has been there since October. And meanwhile, we have a tug of war between the health department and the community services department, and this young man is stuck in limbo. He's stuck in limbo because he should not be on that particular floor. He should be in a loving, caring home in a group home situation. Now, is that the sort of example that we are given to a young man who is in many ways at risk? Let me tell you, this young man is frustrated, he's upset, he calls me on occasion, and let me tell you, Mr. Speaker, he's angry. He's angry. And when he is angry, Philip Martel will tell you he loses his temper. But why shouldn't he? He's frustrated, he's upset. The system isn't working for that young man. Because the system isn't working for him, and because the system isn't listening to him, that's when young people will say, no one cares, I'll do what I want to do, let me just do what I think is best, because as a young person, we all had the answers at that age. So when you think of some of these things, Mr. Speaker, and we will look at how these events are unfolding, it's a real importance that when we have a punitive piece of legislation that is going to say at this stage, and we're going to hear from lots of people who will want to speak on this particular bill, who are going to come in and say, there has to be consequences, yes, but the opportunity for young people to connect with our community, to connect with their community. They're young people who want to feel a part of something. They want to feel that they can have a say in something, that they are being listened to. And that's the greatest concern that we always have as politicians. You know, Mr. Speaker, we always go somewhere and we speak to them. And let me tell you, when I go into the schools where I have the opportunity to speak to them, I say to them, and I think the member from Halifax Citadel put it best once when we were at the same community meeting. Don't let the member from Timberley Prospect speak, because he'll speak for an hour. In this legislature, speaking for an hour on an issue of this importance is really quite an easy task. But when you're speaking to young people in a school situation, my advice to you as elected officials is to go in for that 50-minute class and tell them, take your watch off and say to them, I'm going to talk for 5 minutes. Then I'm going to sit down and I want to hear your questions. I want you to talk to me. And the first reaction you'll get from them is like, when you take the watch off and give it to the kid in the front row, 5 minutes, sir, that's it, you can't talk any longer. So what do you want to talk about? And then they begin, and they open up, and they have their say, and they want to talk about some of the problems in their community. So let me tell you about some of the problems that they've brought to my attention. These are young people who want to be listened to in their community. I remember the first time I visited Madeline Simon's school, Mr. Speaker, and I heard a young man say to me, he wanted to know what I knew about the sport, of getting out there on a skateboard. And I said to the young man, I've never been on a skateboard in my life. I want to know why we don't have a skateboard park. Now, my first reaction was, skateboard park. Okay. I've heard the member from Colchester, Musquodoboit Valley talk about skateboard parks. I've heard him speak at length about the value of it in a community that he represents. And so I took the opportunity with some Lions Club members to go and listen and to see what a skateboard park is. And you know, Mr. Speaker, we now have 2 skateboard parks in the community that I represent. And Mr. Speaker, those skateboard parks are used day and night. Young people are there. We have a sign by each skateboard park which says, this is your property, you take care of it. If you have concerns, make sure you bring them to our attention. They take care of the skateboard park. Yes, there's a few messages written to their girlfriend on one particular part of the and maybe to their boyfriend too, on one particular part of the board. But there are garbage cans there, Mr. Speaker. They are being taken care of. They're not destroying their skateboard park. They're not out there causing problems in the community because it's theirs. It's theirs, Mr. Speaker. They have some ownership of those skateboard parks. And what happened was, when the first time it was brought to my attention, I really said, you know, because I'm thinking, sports, okay? They're going to talk about an outdoor rink. They're going to talk about basketball hoops. No, a skateboard park. Now, for many of us, we're saying, it's going to be a hangout. They're going to be drinking and toking and all those other things. Well, let me tell you, Mr. Speaker, I feel very comfortable going to the skateboard parks in the community that I represent. Day or night, we stop by. As Lions Club members, how are things going? Guys, can we empty the garbage cans for you? You feel comfortable after a while when you go to them and they say to you, as a Lions Club member, and not necessarily as the MLA, you know, thank you for being involved in this. Thank you for listening to us. This is something that we wanted. This is something that we believe we can use and make great use of in our community. Because if we don't listen to these kids, if we don't listen to them, they sure as you know what are going to get out there and get themselves in trouble. But if they feel that they have an adult, if they feel they have a school teacher, if they feel they have a minister or a priest or a director of a youth club who is going to listen to them, who is going to be able to help them out, who is going to feel they can go to that particular person and he or she will listen to me. Let me tell you, Mr. Speaker, then we will have young people in our community who will not be in trouble. Young people in our community who will feel engaged and feel part of the process. And Mr. Speaker, that's after all what it's all about. What it's all about. I'm always so concerned when I tell people that the first teaching job I ever had was in the federal penitentiary system. The federal penitentiary system, the first job that I had was I had to test the young men, and many of them were middle-aged men too, who arrived in the federal penitentiary system at the time, and I had to test their learning. I had to test their reading skills, their math skills. And many of them had dropped out of school. Many of them had learning disabilities. many of them had little or no formal education. And that connection has always been there. That connection between, Mr. Speaker, if you are going to insist upon young people to do well, they have to be given the opportunity to do just that, to do well. They have to feel that they can go to an adult, that they can be in a school situation, that they can reach out and they can receive help. Now, things have changed a lot, of course, in the last number of years. You know, we look at the negative influences. We look at the negative influences that are all around young people today. We look at steroids in sports. We look at some of these violent acts that are being promulgated through these violent videos. We look at some of the other things that young people have to contend with. And I say it to adults all the time. You know, we shouldn't compare what our youth was like as compared to their youth, because they have a great deal more peer pressure put upon them. Many of them grow up far too quickly. They grow up far too quickly. And because of that, the consequences they are, of course, facing are that they are still children, but they expect themselves to be making decisions as adults. And that is, unfortunately, a cruel contradiction. So when we look at what Bill 147 is recommending, and we look at what's going to happen to law amendments, and we look at how things are going to transpire during the next weeks as we go through this bill and this particular piece of legislation, let me remind the members opposite and the Minister of Justice in particular, here we are reacting to an issue of real importance to the community. But that short-term pain is not necessarily going to result in long-term gain. There is no doubt that the Young Offenders Act, that some of the legislation that initially was brought forward could be improved. But that old thing of throwing the baby out with the bathwater is not going to give the solution that we need in this particular case. There is no doubt that young people without the right direction and advice and assistance and role model, there is no doubt that many of them will make poor decisions. But if in return we are positive with them, if we insist upon a degree of respect, if we make clear the consequences of their behavior, if we outline specifically what we want to do and we are willing to listen to them about, then, Mr. Speaker, many, many, many of these young people will feel engaged, they'll feel involved, and they will feel part of the process. And that's the issue. That's the issue. I've heard the member from Cape Breton Nova speak at length about this on many occasions. And let me tell you, he takes ownership of his community because of the people in his community, the young people in his community feel proud of the fact that they can go to their MLA now. They can go to this man and he knows from where they come. Because, Mr. Speaker, that's, after all, what it is when it comes to youth. It's not that old thing of the rotten apple in the barrel and what will happen to all the other people in the school. That is not what happens. Let me tell you, Mr. Speaker, every child has good in him or her. Every child has going to make sure that they have a contribution to make. And I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, that when I did become a teacher, and I recall those days in terms of the fact of how proud my father was. Actually, I'm sure my father was more surprised than proud, but we won't go too far down that road. My father probably said, as my mother said to him, "I told you so." See, he ended up on the right side of the bars. But then there were occasions, Mr. Speaker, then there were occasions where I want you to know that I had the opportunity in the presence of my parents to meet and run into students that I had taught. And it happens once in a while in here. I remember, if we all remember Bill 68, how many of those young health workers who came here through Bill 68 would come into law amendments and they would say to the members present...
Order, please.
Yes, sir.
Let's remember Bill 147. I almost forgot that one. Anyway, the Honourable Member Timberley Prospect on second reading of Bill number 147. The Honourable Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries on a point of order. Agreed. The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just wanted to bring to the attention of the House that it is the Honourable Minister of Natural Resources' 55th birthday today.
The Honourable Minister. Order, please. The Honourable Member Timberley Prospect has the floor.
That's a good enough line to make sure, though, that that 55-year-old young minister over there did not go to school with the member from Hants West. Did not. Thank you for bringing that to the House's attention. And yeah, I have. He takes the member from Hants West takes us to school every day in this particular House. Let me tell you. Thank you. Now, Mr. Speaker, where was I? I know exactly where I was.
Bill 147.
No, well, yes, the comparison I was
Timberley
talking about
Prospect.
was Bill 68. Because I know Bill 147 is not going to be of some consequence, because we don't want to have a repeat of Bill 68. And many of those healthcare workers who came into law amendments, and when I looked at what the influence we had and how we responded to their needs and to those young men and women who were involved, and then you have the opportunity to actually realize that perhaps you do have a positive influence. Because let me tell you, I remember when the member from Sackville-Cobequid was a student at Sackville High School. And the member from Sackville-Cobequid was not only, let me say, an outstanding athlete, he at times could be one of those types of students that you might have to take a visit into the vice principal's office. There would be the occasion when there might be the opportunity to make sure that that young man was listening and listening carefully. Because, you know, this young man was a perfect example of it. You didn't have to really speak too loudly. You had to get his attention. You had to get his attention. But once you got the member's attention, or the young man's attention at the time, he basically had to listen. Why did he have to listen? Because he knew that it wasn't just the teacher involved. It was the home involved. It was his church involved. It was his community involved. It was his athletic coach involved. All of those people in every situation have the opportunity to help be a positive influence, whether it's the young member from Sackville-Cobequid or the 55-year-old minister from the MLA from Yarmouth. Tell Joan to get ready. So as I wrap up my comments, I want to be clear on the fact, Mr. Speaker, that as we take Bill 147, move it into the next stage, it will be an opportunity for people involved in youth groups. It'll be an opportunity for people involved in the churches in our community. It'll be an opportunity for adults who must look at the fact that it takes a village to raise a child. It just doesn't take the Minister of Justice and 51 legislators to sit in this historic chamber and decide we are going to rectify the ills of young people with this particular piece of legislation. This piece of legislation will go through law amendments, it'll come back to this House, and it's important that when it does come back to this House, it's a better piece of legislation, because it must not only deal with those young men and women who need the clear consequences of their behavior, it must also recognize the many, many positive young people who are involved in our society, and we must recognize them also. With those comments, Mr. Speaker, I'll take my place.
Thank you. I'll recognize the member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Actually, Mr. Speaker, I'm rising here today to talk on Bill 147, Youth Justice Act. And I wasn't planning on speaking this evening, but after listening to my colleagues talking, I thought I would like to say a few words. This bill, I'm not going to pretend that I know the legal justice system and what should be done to correct what's going on with youth today. Certainly there are people in Dartmouth East and in all the communities in and around Nova Scotia that do know that there is a problem right now with youth and the crimes that they are involved in. A lot of people would feel that the penalties are not stiff enough and that perhaps there should be increased sentencing. And certainly, as another colleague here tonight has said, that consequences do have to come in line with actions. But I would like to speak more, Mr. Speaker, on what I think we need to do, or some of the issues that we have now in our community that lead youth down the paths that they do take. And as the member from Sackville-Cobequid said earlier this evening, how can we change the course of what youth do? And I think that's the question that we should all be asking ourselves. I myself wouldn't be here today if not for volunteering, starting with volunteering in the school system when my children were in grade primary. So I can speak from that end. Certainly in Dartmouth East there is a huge need for more funding for things that we need in our community. And one of the biggest needs we have in Dartmouth East is the need for a community center. We do not have a community center, which everyone knows is the heart of a community. We need a community center in Dartmouth East so that our youth have a place to go. And as the honourable member from Cape Breton Nova talked eloquently about all of his experience in the center that he has spent numerous hours in, those are the kinds of things that we need in Dartmouth East so that our youth can come in off the streets, whether it's first thing in the morning, maybe for a breakfast program, maybe it's at lunchtime, after school programs, or in the evenings. And also, we're talking about a place for seniors to gather and interact with our youth, which I think is so very important, and younger children also. In Dartmouth East, we have a highly successful Boys and Girls Club, but right now they are operating out of 5 different places within Dartmouth East, which they're doing the best they can, but they do need a home. So we're looking for a home for our youth in Dartmouth East. One of the great assets we do have in Dartmouth East is our schools and all the people that work in our schools from day to day and on the weekends, and that's everybody from, and I hope I don't leave anybody out, but we've got, teachers, we've got cleaning staff, and the parents that volunteer in our school system, and the children themselves. These are so important, Mr. Speaker. But as we all know, the school system has taken a beating over the years, and I know that firsthand from my 3 years as a school board member with the Halifax Regional School Board. And we've seen everything cut from art programs, music programs, after-school programs. Special needs students have huge wait lists right now, Mr. Speaker, and gone are the days when we used to have enrichment programs in the schools. So we've lost things like our youth support workers. They were cut. These were people that were there on the front line, Mr. Speaker, so that if there was a youth at risk in the school, after school or any time during the school when they were just wandering the hallways or whatever, these youth support workers recognized these youth, and they could come up to them and ask them and question, what are you doing? What class should you be in? Come on, let's walk down the hallway, I'll take you to class, and we'll get back to what you're here to do. But we've lost a lot of these really valuable assets and resources, and I know that the Minister of Education, always says that, I don't want to quote him exactly, but because I can't, but that if there was more money, we would put it into education, and we'll wait and see the budget, I guess, on tomorrow, so we can remain hopeful for that. Mr. Speaker, there are schools in the system that can provide more things for youth after school because they're not P3 schools, and unfortunately, the P3 schools do not have the same access for students as our regular schools. And even the regular schools do incur costs when they stay open in the evenings and after school. There is a cost incurred there because they still have to pay for the lights, they have to pay for the janitors and these sorts of things. So the P3 schools, even though they're beautiful, they have the better playgrounds, the better computers, the better libraries, the better gymnasium, everything is better in them as far as the facility itself. They don't have the accessibility that we have in our other schools. And actually in Dartmouth East, we don't have a P3 school. But I would like to point that out for people that maybe perhaps are suffering from not being able to access these beautiful facilities in their own neighborhood. So I think that is an issue for some people. We've seen funding cut right across the board in this province for numerous things, and it is hard for children and youth to get out and enjoy joining a sports group, whether it's soccer, hockey, basketball, or what have you. Some of these are less expensive to join and require less equipment, but even if you're a parent and you've got one child in one of these things, and then you want to put them into a music program or maybe an arts program after school, and we've heard a lot of I've heard a lot of my colleagues talk here in this session about funding cuts to sports, and I'm very happy that I heard some of them talk about art programs this evening, because that's very important to a lot of students. Not all students are inclined to want to follow a sports route for their extracurricular activities, and a lot of students do really excel in art, and that's been one of the places that has taken a big hit. So, if you have a community center where you can offer some sort of after-school arts program, I think that would be very beneficial to some of the youth in our community. Actually, the other evening I did have an opportunity to attend the first Scout Troop, Woodlawn Scout Troop awards ceremony at Woodlawn United Church, and they were getting their Chief Scout Award to youth there. And what a great group of youth they have there. Now, this is something that is very inexpensive, as if you want to compare it to soccer or some of these other things. And I'm not putting any of those other things down. Certainly, they're all great and fantastic. The point I'm trying to make is that not all families have access to the same resources to put their kids in these programs, and I think it's some of these things, it's up to our government to make our communities accessible for youth at all ranges of income, that no matter what kind of income the parents have, we have to make more things available to them. So this is why it's so important to keep our schools open. When the school closes, when the teachers are gone, we need somebody there that's going to come in and offer these programs, and we have to think of our schools as community resources, as a community center. And I'm hoping that in the future, if we ever, when we do see new schools built, that they're built with that understanding that really this should be a community center. And there's a great example of that in Eastern Passage. They have a school that operates as a community center after hours, and I think they're doing a great job there. So as I did mention, we've taken cuts to arts and culture, and I know, the parents of the music students, they do a fabulous job of fundraising, but it's come to the point where, fundraising is taking over the lives of some of these parents, and actually, all the members here probably know how fun it is to go to auctions, but these parents are putting auctions on at an alarming rate, and it's not to provide for extras a lot of the times. It's to provide for things like books for the library, computers, and fundraising that goes on in the school system is just phenomenal. I mean, some of the schools that I've been in, when the curtains are falling off the windows. Parents are actually fundraising to put curtains on the windows. I mean, this is how bad things have gotten in the school system, and they want their kids to go to a school that is nice, and they feel happy to be there. They don't want to go to a place that's, falling apart at the seams. So, Mr. Speaker, I commend all the parents that are out there and doing all this fundraising to provide trips for the students, to send the sports teams away, and to provide those resources in the classroom. There's huge fundraising going on now to replace playgrounds in our schools, because the school board does not have the money to do that. That's an issue. There is no money to do that. And, so there's all this fundraising going on, and that's going to continue for a long time unabated. I don't see any end to that. I would like, Mr. Speaker, this did give me an opportunity this evening actually to go through some of my notes. I recently attended through the Dartmouth Community Health Board. They put on a great little get-together recently where they had what they called a youth dialogue. And what they did was we broke into groups.
To keep the conversations down. Member for Dartmouth East has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What I was saying was that the Dartmouth Community Health Board held a wonderful get-together, and we had youth there because they had done a survey previous to that asked a lot of questions to youth, and they had actually 5 different schools involved in that survey. The group that I was involved in looked at family dynamics, and we tried to find the number 1, 2, and 3 issues that were keeping Dartmouth from becoming a healthy, safe neighborhood. And some of those things that the youth came up with were, they talked about their neighborhood, the safety issues of that, and their feelings. And Mr. Speaker, in the survey, I'll just give you one example, and someday I hope to have more time to talk at length on that survey. But 14% of 7 to 12-year-olds said that yes, the community valued them. That's a small amount, yeah. So they were looking for solutions that would make things better. They talked about some parenting issues, and this again is youth. Now there were some adults there, and I didn't write down, which comments were from youth or which comments were from adults, but I'll just go over a few of them because I think they are important. When we're talking about youth justice, it's the youth that we need to be communicating with. And what happened was the Dartmouth Community Health Board, previous to this little get-together, had seniors come in and talk about the same, some of the issues that were important to seniors, and then they had the youth come in. So some of the things they felt, that were important under parenting issues was that they needed more support. They felt that if they had more support, they would be more likely to succeed. There was a lot of mention about positive role models, that these youth wanted to make their parents proud, that they felt they were rewarded when they actually could make their parents feel proud. That was a reward to them. And they said that they felt that it was only small numbers of youth that were actually making the larger mistakes in the population. Some of the youth were asking about having opportunities. They wanted more opportunities to get involved in, and they were concerned about the cost of these activities, as I mentioned earlier. Some of these activities are out of reach for youth right now. They were concerned about their parents and the cost of childcare that their parents had to pay, which kept that an issue. They did talk about school sports teams and having to fundraise for getting drives to places and getting the uniforms, and the lack of opportunity in the school because of the lack of funding or the cuts to funding. They did feel that, this was very interesting, that there was a lack of discipline and that youth had too much freedom. So I thought they were very open in talking about some of those things. Now, they did come up with some solutions, and I think the number one thing that was overriding everything was communication. And they felt that, kids and families needed to maybe get a contract going with each other so that they were responsible for themselves, so that if they had a contract with their parents, that maybe, the parent could haul that out and say, look, 2 months ago, this is what you said, and you're not holding up your end of the bargain. They felt that it would be very beneficial to set up some sort of parent and youth groups in a community center. Now, we need a community center in Dartmouth East, as I said, and that was one of the things that I thought would be, I thought that would be great, that would be very valuable, because if you had a group of youth that could sit down in one room with parents that weren't the parents of that particular group of youth, you can hear it when you're not talking face to face to your own children or teenagers. It's easier, I think, for them to open up to you. It's harder with your own kids sometimes. They felt that the youth groups would want to invite the parents in, and that there should be, free babysitting. They had all these ideas. I mean, they really had this, thought this through a little bit. So again, they really thought, another solution was to make the programs more accessible and more affordable. And of course, that's all about money and funding, and that's really where the government can step in. They wanted the schools to be more actively involved and included, and they felt that the amount of time that students spent in school was something that needed to be looked at. They even talked about the time that school begins and when it ends, and how that doesn't always work out well for youth, because they go to school all day, they have part-time jobs in the evenings, they've got their studies, and then they're expected to be back early in the morning. So they had those kinds of thoughts. They felt that some of the things that came out was that some people felt that parents were not always as welcomed and as encouraged to be involved after elementary. And I have to say, I think that is true to a certain extent, because parents are they're practically begged to get involved in elementary school, and then when your kids go off to junior high, you're sort of expected to, it's hands off. They're in junior high. They want to do things on their own. And when I questioned the youth actually at this forum, they said, no, that's not the way we feel, I was surprised, although I had always felt that in my heart that that's how they felt. They said, no, we want parents there. We love when the parents are there helping us, and they can help with fundraising. And certainly when I questioned them, well, how would you feel about high school? No problem. They felt that the home and school, the PTA, whatever you want to call it, should be highly involved at all levels of their learning experience, and that they felt that that was very, very important to them. So really what I would like to sort of end my comments at are that I don't have the answers, and I don't think anybody sitting here has the answers, but I think a lot of people have good suggestions. And I think if we go to the youth in our community more and ask them for what their suggestions are and offer them up places where they can meet together with other youth and people older and younger than themselves and feel part of the community, that's only going to benefit all of us, Mr. Speaker. So I would like to actually take this chance to close debate on Bill 147.
I recognize the Minister of Justice to close debate on Bill 147.
I appreciate the comments of honourable members. I know that all honourable members are very interested in the well-being of young people in Nova Scotia, and we all share that as an objective. We're very, very concerned about our young people in all of our constituencies and wherever we live, and we have had an opportunity to hear during debate and second reading members talk about young people and the concern that they have for them, and clearly the government shares in that same concern. We are interested in as well in protecting the people of Nova Scotia and protecting those same young people from harm in illegal activity. So, Mr. Speaker, with that, I'd close debate and move second reading.
Motion is for second reading on Bill 147. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion is carried.
47, title an act to amend Chapter 38 of the Acts of 2001, the Youth Justice Act, and Chapter 293 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Motor Vehicle Act.
Order this bill will be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments, and I'll recognize the Government House Leader for tomorrow's agenda.
Request concurrence of the House to return to the order of business, presenting reports of committees.
Order of business, presenting reports of committees. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, as Chairman on the Committee on Law Amendments, I am directed to report that the committee has met and considered the following bills. Bill number 148, an act respecting the administration of justice. Bill number 152, an act to amend Chapter 260 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Liquor Control Act. Bill number 158, an act respecting the practice of paramedicine. Bill number 159, an act to amend Chapter 31 of the Acts of 2002, the Université Saint-Anne Collège de l'Acadie Act. Bill number 160, an act to change the name of the University College of Cape Breton and to amend Chapter 484 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the University College of Cape Breton and related statutes. And Bill number 161, an act to amend Chapter 438 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Special Places Protection Act. The committee recommends these bills to the favorable consideration of the House without amendment.
Okay, is it agreed? Oh, okay, Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As Chairman of the Committee on Law Amendments, I am directed to report that the committee has met and considered the following bill. Bill number 146, an act to facilitate interjurisdictional policing in certain circumstances. The committee recommends this bill to the favorable consideration of the House with certain amendments.
Is it agreed? It is agreed. The Government House Leader for tomorrow's agenda.
Mr. Speaker, tomorrow the House will meet at the hour of 12 noon, and the Minister of Finance will be presenting the budget. In conclusion of the budget address, we'll start on the reply to the budget speech. I presume will take about 10, 15 minutes, and then, Mr. Speaker, we'll move into the daily routine and question period, followed by government business, which will be Committee of the Whole House on bills. The House will sit from 12 until 6, and Mr. Speaker, I move now that the House do rise.
Motion is that the House rise till tomorrow at 12. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Contrary minded, nay. House is adjourned.